The night it happened looked completely ordinary, the kind of quiet suburban evening where nothing dramatic ever seems to happen. My wife had just finished a 12-hour shift saving kids' lives. We were driving home through a wealthy neighborhood outside the city, and the only thing on our minds was whether we had enough energy left to heat up leftovers when we got home. Then the red and blue lights showed up in the mirror behind us, and within 15 minutes my wife and I were both kneeling on hot pavement in handcuffs while a crowd of strangers filmed the whole thing. Yeah, that happened. And the craziest part, the officer who arrested us had absolutely no idea he had just cuffed the police chief who ran his entire department. My wife, Olivia Turner, is one of the calmest people I know. You kind of have to be when you spend your days performing surgery on children's hearts. That night she'd done 3 operations back to back. 1 emergency repair on a 6-year-old boy, 1 premature baby barely bigger than her hand, and 1 middle school soccer player whose lung collapsed right on the field. By the time she got into the car, her shoulders were tight and her eyes were red from exhaustion, but she still had that little smile she gets after a good day in the operating room. The kind of smile that says somebody's kid is still alive because she refused to give up. I was sitting in the passenger seat reading a report on my tablet, half paying attention, half zoning out after a long week at work. My name's Darius Hayes. At the time, I'd been chief of the Atlanta Police Department for about 6 months. Long enough to understand how broken parts of the system were, but not long enough to fix them yet. Earlier that week, I'd actually been reviewing complaints against one particular officer, Ronan Hale. Excessive force, racial profiling, illegal searches. The kind of file that makes your stomach sink when you realize the pattern has been going on for years. Funny thing about life, though. Sometimes the universe decides to show you the problem firsthand. Olivia was driving our Escalade down Peachtree Road when the patrol lights appeared behind us. She glanced at the mirror and sighed the way people do when they already know where a situation is heading. Interior light on window down, hands on the wheel. It was like muscle memory. If you're black in America, you learn those moves early. You weren't speeding, I said. Does that matter? She replied quietly. We both knew the answer to that. The patrol car pulled up behind us and an officer stepped out slowly, already shining his flashlight through the windows, even though the sun hadn't fully set yet. His partner stayed near the cruiser, watching. The guy walking up to our window had that swagger some officers carry when they think they own the street, boots, heavy shoulders, backhand hovering near his belt like he wanted everyone around to remember he had a gun. He stopped beside Olivia's window and blasted the flashlight straight into her face. License and registration. No greeting, no explanation. Olivia kept her voice calm the way she does with nervous parents in hospital waiting rooms. Good evening, officer. May I ask why I was stopped? Did I say you could talk? He snapped. The flashlight stayed right in her eyes. Then he looked around the interior of the car, slowly taking in the leather seats, the dashboard, the clean lines of the vehicle. Nice ride, he muttered. Let me guess. Stolen. His partner chuckled near the patrol car. Olivia handed over her license without reacting. He read her name out loud with a sneer. Dr. Olivia Turner. He laughed like the word doctor offended him. What kind of doctor? Pediatric cardiac surgeon, she replied. I operate on children with congenital heart defects. That answer didn't land the way logic says it should. Instead, he leaned closer to the window. Right. Sure. Then he stepped back. Step out of the vehicle. Olivia blinked. For what reason? His jaw tightened immediately. You questioning me? I'm asking why I was stopped. You failed to signal a lane change. It was a lie. I knew it, she knew it, and later the body camera footage would prove it. But in that moment, it didn't matter because the officer had already decided the story he wanted. Olivia stepped out slowly with her hands visible. The officer grabbed her arm harder than necessary and turned her toward the hood of the SUV. Hands on the car. A small group of pedestrians had started slowing down nearby. Phones were already coming out. People sensed drama before they even understood what was happening. Officer, I'm a surgeon, Olivia said quietly. I need my hands. Should have thought about that before you got difficult. Click. The handcuffs snapped around her wrists. Watching someone cuff the person you love is a strange feeling. There's anger, sure, but also this cold calculation happening in the back of your head. You're asking yourself how far the situation might escalate and whether the wrong move could make it worse. For the first few minutes, I stayed in the car. I watched. I listened. I wanted to see exactly how far this officer would go when he thought nobody important was looking. But when he shoved Olivia harder against the hood and started patting her down like she was a criminal, that was enough. I opened the door and stepped out. "Officer," I said calmly. He turned immediately. "Who told you to get out of the car? That woman is my wife." He stepped closer with that same smug smile. "Then get back in the vehicle before you join her." I didn't move. "You have no probable cause for this stop," I said evenly, "and no legal basis to detain her." His face hardened. "You a lawyer now?" "No." I looked him straight in the eyes. "But I know the law." That was all it took. The moment someone challenges authority like that, some people take it as a personal insult. "Turn around," he ordered. "For what charge?" "Obstruction." I shook my head slowly. "Don't do this." He grabbed my arm. Too late. Click. The cuffs closed around my wrists, and suddenly both of us were kneeling on the pavement beside our own car. The crowd had grown to maybe 50 people now, cameras everywhere. The officer puffed his chest out like he'd just caught a pair of dangerous criminals. "Dispatch," he said into his radio, "2 suspects in custody, possible vehicle theft." At that point, I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because the situation had crossed into that strange territory where the absurd becomes undeniable. Then he opened the trunk. Inside were 3 things: a gym bag, a case of bottled water, and a folded American burial flag in a display case. He picked it up. "What's this?" "That belonged to my father," I said quietly. He glanced at it and tossed it back into the trunk like garbage. Something inside me went completely still after that. My father had served 23 years in the Army. That flag was handed to my mother at his funeral, with the words "on behalf of a grateful nation." Watching this officer treat it like trash, that was the moment I knew his career was finished. Sirens approached a few minutes later. Backup units pulled around the corner. 4 more officers stepped out. One of them was Sergeant Blaine, a man I had personally promoted 2 weeks earlier. He walked toward the scene casually, then froze when he saw me on the ground. His face went pale. "Oh my God," he whispered. He rushed over and dropped to one knee. "Chief Hayes, are you injured?" The words hit the air like a thunderclap. The arresting officer stared at him. Chief What Blaine was already unlocking my cuffs with shaking hands. "Chief Darius Hayes, Atlanta Police Department." I stood slowly and rubbed my wrists while the officer stared at me like someone had pulled the floor out from under him. Recognition crept across his face in slow motion. Confusion first, then horror. "Chief," he stammered. "I didn't know." I looked at him quietly for a long moment. "That's exactly the problem," I said. "You didn't know because you never looked." Olivia stood beside me, her wrists red where the cuffs had dug in. "My wife saved 3 children today," I continued. "You threw her against a car because she's a black woman driving through a wealthy neighborhood." The officer's knees buckled and he dropped to the pavement. "I'm sorry," he whispered. Olivia walked toward him slowly. "You're not sorry for what you did," she said softly. "You're sorry you got caught." Minutes later, he was wearing the same handcuffs he'd used on us. The charges would come later: civil rights violations, false arrest, evidence tampering. Federal prosecutors took the case, and within a year, he was sentenced to prison. But here's the part people don't always talk about. The worst thing about that night wasn't that he arrested the police chief. The worst thing is that he had treated dozens of other people the same way before that. People who didn't have cameras, witnesses, or a chief sitting in the passenger seat. Olivia was lucky. Most people aren't. So I want to ask you something honestly. If you had been standing in that crowd watching the whole thing unfold, would you have stepped forward and said something? Or would you have just kept filming like everyone else? Let me know what you think in the comments, because stories like this aren't just about one officer's mistake. They're about the kind of world we decide to tolerate when nobody thinks anyone important is watching.